Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever the fuck you're tuning in. This is another episode of Tailgate Trash Talk brought to you by Backyard Sports. I got Bentley with me. How you doing, bud?
I'm great, man. Living the dream over here. Just excited to talk ball. Really dive into the games last week, and talk about some next weekend.
Yeah, buddy. Well, let's jump right into it, man. Listen, if you're tailing us out there in Vegas land, you're making some fucking money. We want to combine 29, 14, and 2. Obviously, we pushed there with Ball State UGA. But other than that, we had a pretty goddamn good week. 15 games over 500 between the both of us. So if you're tailing us out there, throw some ducats our way. We could certainly share in some of the success. But yeah, I want to ask your opinion here. I know there's an obvious one here, and I kind of want to leave it for you because you've been on this train. But what are your thoughts on this Bama Texas game last week? And is it safe now maybe to say that Texas is back? Because I know I told you a couple weeks ago that I've kind of been the guy on this show. Once a season, I'll kind of postulate like, "Hmm, can we say Texas is back?" And then they go lay an egg the next week. I, how do you feel? Can we say they're back? Is it too soon? Still, I don't know what's going on here.
So historically, I am not a Texas is back guy. Historically, but I'm all in on this Texas team, dude. They went into Tuscaloosa and won the line of scrimmage game on both sides of the ball. That doesn't happen, man. It's not in the SEC typically, and definitely not from a Big 12 team coming over
Right.
there into Alabama, Roll Tideville, and pushing around those big boys, those 4 and 5 star guys they have on the lines there at Alabama. Now the talent deficiency is a little skeptical. Like you can make an argument that talent has left Tuscaloosa recently, um, but it's still Nick Saban. It's still Alabama. It's still those boys down in Tuscaloosa that have been winning national titles and really dominating college football for the last 15 years, right? So I think it's safe to say that Texas is back. I really do. We'll get to our totem picks at the end, and there may be, some more talk on this. But I'm willing to stake my flag and say that Texas is back.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, and I think I finally have the confidence to be able to say it, right? I know I mentioned I've kind of floated it out there as, tiptoeing, maybe hedging my bet a little bit, wait and see, that sort of thing, but it feels like it. It feels like this Texas team, we talked about it last week, right? How they could win that game was make Jalen Milroe a passer, and that's exactly what they did. And we saw at times he was able to find a guy and made a couple of nice plays. He had one long touchdown called back, which I think did swing the momentum pretty heavily, but the refs got that call right, so we can't sit here and harp on it. It's just that swung the momentum because he came back, he threw a pick six not long after that. Um, that's how you beat Bama. Control the line of scrimmage, make Jalen Milroe a passer, and even on the other side of the ball, that's where I was the most surprised in this game is that the Texas offensive line was able to really take control of that line of scrimmage. I didn't expect it as much. I didn't expect Texas to score in the 30s, but they found a way to control the line of scrimmage and were really moving the ball up and down the field. Ewers looked 180 degrees better than he was the week before. He was you know, at times looked like he might not necessarily be the answer there in week one, and then or in week one, and then comes back against Bama here, a vastly superior foe than they played in week one, and he looked damn good. They've got skill players, but the one thing I noticed and I know we floated it out there last week, but it showed even more on the field this week. They are fucking fast on
Yep.
defense. Not something you usually see a lot from Big 12 defenses. They're usually kind of, undersized. They're plotting up front, but they've got some big fucking fast guys on that defense at all three levels too. So, yeah, I'm with you. I'm comfortable in saying I think Texas is back. I think this is maybe head and shoulders the best team in the Big 12. Oklahoma's offense looks like they've got something going, but if Dylan Gabriel can't stay healthy like he's never been able to in his career in college, they're going to be in big trouble.
Yep.
So there's always that X factor with Oklahoma. But right now, it looks like Texas and everybody else in the Big 12, and they do look like one of the handful of best teams in the country. Not to spoil too much coming up here in a little bit.
It does help going into Tuscaloosa with the highest graded recruit ever to come out of high school football
Yeah.
playing
Yeah.
quarterback for you. That does lend some assistance to your scoring there.
Yeah,
Who
sure.
who he looked like it on Saturday night.
Yeah.
Some of the deep balls he threw, the touch that he
Mhm.
put on those balls to drop it in the breadbasket to his receivers, 30 yards downfield was simply phenomenal.
Yeah, I thought there was a chance that Arch might be the guy there soon, right? In his career, early, but not if Ewers is playing this way, right? Sark is probably making the right decision. It feels like he's making the right decision. You mentioned how highly recruited and highly rated Quinn Ewers was coming out of high school, and Saturday, man, we saw that, and hopefully his biggest thing's always been consistency, right? He's got to be able to put it together for 4 or 5 straight games and not lay an egg this week coming up. So for all you UT fans out there, hopefully he can keep it going, and looks like you guys got a little something you can be excited about as we approach the later stages of this season. Colorado, I want to talk a little bit about that game because I spent the whole week telling anybody that would listen I could not fucking understand why they were a 3.5 point dog or 3.5 point favorite. It should have been at least a touchdown, in my opinion. And then I spent the first 2 quarters of that game like, fuck, am I gonna have to eat my fucking words this week? But then the offense woke up. Nebraska couldn't get out of their own way. Nebraska doing Nebraska things throughout that entire game. I hate to have to say that because Stove is a big Nebraska fan, and I hate to, but I mean the reality is, right? They shot themselves in the foot a bunch in the first half. They had chances, turnovers, mistakes, penalties at the worst times, and they allowed Colorado to kind of steady the ship and figure it out. And then the offense took over. Shador got hot. The running game got hot, and the defense played really well throughout the game against a Nebraska team that I think a lot of people thought was going to be able to just bully ball them. And they didn't. Other than the one long run, you're looking at a Nebraska team that it was 2 yards in a cloud of dust for most of the game. But man, it feels like Colorado, they feel like the real deal this year in that Pac-12. I think with the addition of Colorado, by the end of the season, we're going to be looking at it and saying maybe the Pac-12 had a pretty decent portfolio this year because now UCLA's cracked the top 25. You look at Washington, what they're doing, Michael Penix and Caleb Williams, obviously there in USC, Utah with everything that they can do both offensively and defensively, and then you've got Colorado in the mix. Pac-12 might be showing a little strength here, and Vegas. I heard this week the stat that they've got a pretty hefty position on the Colorado total wins because they had it at 3.5 total wins to begin the season, which again felt really disrespectful because you look at the athletes that they brought in, they can out athlete probably 5 teams at least on their schedule.
Yeah,
just line up and be better than the other team. Man, it just feels like everybody was kind of sleeping on what Prime was doing there, and we're starting to see it really now. Things are starting to swing. I think they're up to 7.5 wins in the Vegas line, and the spread this week against Colorado State is not as disrespectful as the one that we saw.
not quite. All right, so Colorado, in this game that they just played, they ran the ball 33 times for 58 yards, which is not great. Shador was 31 for 42 for 393 and 2 tugs. Phenomenal. Does he keep that up? I mean, they've played TCU, who I think we both kind of agree is not great, right? They played Nebraska, who we know is not great. They're playing Colorado State this week. They should crush them. Then they go to Oregon. They host Southern Cal. They play at Arizona State, not great. Versus Stanford, not great. Then they have to go to UCLA home against Oregon State, home against Arizona, who knows at this point, right? Then they go to Washington and they close the year at Utah.
It's tough
Are
schedule.
there are there 5 wins on that schedule?
Um, I think
5 might be the number.
that maybe, but I think you're going to see a couple of things happen throughout the season with Colorado. I think they're going to be able to win shootouts. And I look at that Oregon game, they don't have a really good defense, right? They've got offensive firepower, obviously. That's going to be a shootout. Maybe that's a coin flip if you can continue to be as productive offensively as you are. Oregon State, I don't look at that as a slam dunk. And by the way, I didn't even mention them a moment ago with the ranked teams in the Pac 12, but they are
Yeah.
ranked at 22, 23 right now, something like that. So I think that they were 23 last week. They're up to 16 this week. That's right.
Yeah.
But I think they stack up okay against Oregon State. It's the Washington, it's the Utah, it's the USC, right? And going to UCLA, I think you beat up on Stanford, you beat up on Arizona, you beat up on Arizona State, and you take your chances in a track meet against Oregon State, maybe even Washington, whose defense is decent, not great. You're going to have to score against them because, like I said, Michael Penix is just fucking unbelievable there. So, 5 wins. I think right now, Vegas is trying to self-correct from the number that they, laid early in the season. 5 wins might be a stretch because of how suddenly competitive the Pac-12 is going to be this year. I don't think any of us really thought that all these teams were going to be this good this year. I think everybody was prepared for a down year for UCLA. I don't think everybody was buying Oregon State. I know I wasn't, at least. You look at Utah, if they're missing Cam Rising for a long time, how much are they going to be able to weather the storm? But I think you're absolutely right. It's a good point, right? You look at the rest of that schedule, they play some of their tougher games on the road, too. They go to Utah. That's a fucking hellacious environment to go to.
Nobody wins in Utah.
Nobody wins in Utah. You go to Washington. That's a tough crowd there in Washington.
They don't go to Washington. They
I
go
thought
to
you said they
Washington.
did. I'm sorry.
They go to Washington State.
Washington
Sorry.
State. Okay.
I
Sorry.
may have misspoken.
I probably misheard, but
They dodged Washington this year, which is good for them.
that's right. They don't even play Washington this year.
No, they
right.
don't. But they get Washington State with Cam Ward, who's just as good as Michael Penix.
yeah. And a pretty raucous environment up there too. So
Yep.
they bring the noise, in their stadium, especially with the traveling Cougar flag for game day. They're pretty hyped. But yeah, I think you're right. I think the question is a legitimate question. Can they get 5?
So to get to 7, we'll say they beat the teams they should beat, right? So to get to 7, find me a win. At Oregon, home Southern Cal, at UCLA, home Oregon State, at Wazoo, at Utah. Which one of those is a win?
I think the 3 games I target for a possible win, and I'll give you one that I think will be a win.
Okay.
I'll take Oregon State at home. I'll take that as a win. I think it's that game. It's the Washington State game. You just hope you catch them and you can weather that crowd. And then it's Oregon. You turn it into a track meet and you hope that you can do what you did against TCU and just outscore them. Those are the 3 games I look at. I'll take one. If I have to pick one, it'll be Oregon State at home to get.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that's the one I would.
But you're already assuming Arizona State, and Colorado State,
and Stanford,
and Stanford are.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah,
I think I target that Oregon State game at home, right? If you're betting that line as it stands right now, that's the game you've got to see him get for sure. Yep. Absolutely.
You talk about
Yeah, I think this is a good question, right? And I think we can go back to his days at Jackson State, right? Because he was uber successful there, but it wasn't like he was undefeated in his first season there. And you saw him continue to build the program. I think that the one thing that Coach Prime does that a lot of other coaches don't do is that he relates to players really well. And I think that keeps him kind of even keel. I think his focus it's probably not something I would have expected from Prime Time, the NFL player, with how selfish and self-centered he was as an NFL player. it feels so genuine with him that he cares so much for these players. He cares for his program and these young men. And I think that helps keep him even keel. And I don't think we're going to see a tirade from Coach Prime like you might expect from a guy who was that guy in the NFL. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I agree. I think that Coach Prime is very different than NFL player primetime Deion Sanders. I think with age comes perspective, and with perspective comes the ability to remain level-headed. Right. Um, that's not to say you can't be passionate and be level-headed, because we know that if he has one thing in droves, it's passion.
Yeah,
Right. He is a passionate guy, but it's like you said, he's genuine. He's passionate about his players, man. Like, he wants to set those guys up for success. That's
yeah,
his goal. His goal is obviously to win games, right? But he's trying to be there for his players in the best way that he knows how to do. And I think that, given perspective, he knows the best thing for him to do is not to fly off the handle if they lose games.
yep.
He understands. He played, what did he play, a decade in the NFL, something like that, maybe longer. He
I think he had, yeah,
understands.
dozen or so. Yep.
Yeah, like he understands that it's a long year, and that this, now he may say publicly that they're in it to win a national title this year, but I think that deep down he probably knows that they won't.
I was going to ask you that question.
Oh, okay.
It feels like, as he talks, it feels like he understands what it means to build a program,
Yeah.
right? That if they don't win a national championship this year, it's not a lost year for them, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think that even though he's not saying it publicly, that's something that he knows, right?
Yeah.
So he I think he knows that there will be trials and tribulations this year, and he probably has the foresight to already have a plan in place to deal with those things, to where he would shoulder the burden of taking that loss. Like, he's not going to put that on his players. That's not something that it from the outside perspective that I have, it doesn't seem like that's something he would do. He's not going to get up in front of the media and be like, "Hey, we threw 4 picks. Our guys didn't play well enough. Da 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 da." He's going to do the coach speak. He's going to say, "I didn't put us in a position to win," and give you the whole spiel about how it was my fault. I should have prepared better, done this and that. But he's never going to have an ego loss, right? Like, primetime is just not going to have that. Deion Sanders is going to be Deion Sanders all the way through and through. Now, I did say that player and coach are two different things, right? But one thing that he has a lot of is self-confidence and his ability to get these guys ready to roll every Saturday. So I think that
memory too. To play that position, you have to have a short-term memory, right? When you play cornerback in the NFL.
Yes, 100%. I think they'll be fine whenever their loss comes. I don't foresee any issues with them being able to bounce back. I think they'll feed off of their coach, and he will absorb any negativity that team encounters.
Yeah, I agree. I look at it and I think back to the times at Jackson State, right, when they had, they took some tough losses. It was always him in the media. We didn't do a good enough job preparing our guys to win. We didn't have them ready to play, that sort of stuff. So I 100% agree that it feels like that's what we're going to get from Coach Prime. And I completely agree. He's not going to lack for ego. I don't think that's what we're going to deal with. The cascading effect would be if they go on a long losing streak and it looks like he's not able to kind of deliver on some of the things that he said he's been able to or he will be able to deliver on. Maybe that impacts recruiting, but I also think that he uniquely, maybe more uniquely than any other coach in college sports, relates to these guys on a level that feels so natural that I don't know that he's ever going to run into a situation where it's hard on him to recruit players anywhere he goes. He did it at Jackson State at an HBCU. He's done it at Colorado in the transfer portal in their first year. I don't think he's ever going to really struggle to recruit. But that could be one thing that if they do go on a long losing streak, maybe it starts to impact some of that. Hey, maybe he can't do this at the highest level. But
yeah,
they got so many goddamn athletes there, man. I look at, you got USC, you got Oregon, you got Utah, you got, those tough games. Maybe Oregon State becomes a tough game for them, but they just have so many athletes that I don't foresee them going on a 3, 4, 5 game losing streak this season.
I do think it will be very interesting, though. Hey, I do think it would be very interesting though once his sons are no longer a part of the program, how
Yeah.
he goes about handling changeover
Yep.
from having someone he has that real like specific close connection with running his team to handing that off to somebody else, right?
Yep.
I have no doubt he'll be able to get a recruit, but just building that relationship
Yep.
will be an interesting endeavor, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, when your son plays the most important position on the field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's
your other son plays quarterback of the defense. It's like
right. Exactly. Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's shift gears. Let's jump into week 3 here, and I wanna see some games. I want to hear some games. Maybe pick one here. Talk to me a little bit about a game you're looking forward to. I'm gonna tee you up here. There's one big one on the agenda for your boys down there in Columbia
yes,
going
there is.
into Athens
Yes, there is.
as heavy underdogs. What's USC gonna do here this week? Are we gonna shock the world?
USC is going to shock the world.
Yeah.
USC is going to do it. We have the best quarterback and the best receiver, and the best receiver who's injured in the SEC going right now. Right, Xavier Leggett, formerly of special teams fame, last year returned a kick in a bowl game. Spencer Rattler has kind of come around to being the quarterback that we all expected him to be and thought he was going to be under Lincoln Riley. He's 55 for 66 with 698 yards and 3 touchdowns this year. I mean, it does not get any better than that. I'm going to be honest. Going into, I forget the name of the stadium. Sanford Stadium, excuse me. Playing between the Ferns down there in Athens is tough for any opponent. Does not change the fact that Spencer Rattler is playing very well. Georgia has a very, very good team. Not as good as last year or the year prior, I don't believe. Carolina is a program on the way up. We went in there as an unranked team in 2019 and beat them. We're 27.5-point underdogs. I'm here for it, baby. I think it's time. So I can get further ahead. I think it's time for South Carolina to get themselves on the map, get back in the top 25, a place that we belong as a program. Bring back the glory days of Steve Spurrier, but just do it with Shane Beamer. I'm all in on Carolina this week. I'm going to be betting them on the money line. I'm going to be betting them on the spread to hedge a little bit. But I truly believe that Carolina can go into Athens and into Sanford Stadium and win between the hedges. I have full confidence that they can do that. The way their offense is humming right now, man, they pitched a shutout in the second half last week against a Furman team that had a very good run game. They ran all over Carolina in the first half, and then we came out in the second half and pitched a total shutout. It was incredible. I'm all in, dude. I'm so excited.
I love it. I love the confidence. Georgia scares me a bit, but I'm not the Gamecocks fan here. There's a lot of talent still on that team, but they are not the boogeyman that they were the last 2 years. They've had a couple of cupcakes here to start the season. They've got this little guy who reminds me of Dante Hall, though. That's the only thing I really want to point out. This Muse kid, punt returner extraordinaire. When they get the ball in his hands on offense, he looks like a human joystick.
Yep.
I like to watch him. I hope he doesn't do it against South Carolina this weekend. I picked Georgia, but I'm in your corner. I'll be rooting to be wrong on this one, and wrong by at least 28 points, so that they knock off Georgia on the money line, which, by the way, is an insane bloated payday. I looked at it earlier. It was like it's 2,000 now. So
is it really? I couldn't find the line before we started.
Plus 2,000 on DraftKings. So you're getting 20 to 1 on your money if you're laying some money on the Gamecocks this weekend. So not only do you have your fanhood vested interest, but you put some ducats on there, you get some big time return on that investment.
Yes, you're welcome in advance, folks.
Yeah, take that to the bank. Bet the mortgage.
Well, then maybe don't bet the mortgage, but please bet responsibly.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked a little bit about Colorado, and I mentioned the line this week is a little less disrespectful. 23 is a lot, but I just think Colorado is that much better. Colorado State is not not a team that I'm going to look at and say they scare me in any way. This a couple interesting lines that I want to talk about real quick. Kansas State, Missouri, and I know I brought it up to you before the show.
Yeah.
Kansas State, Missouri at a 5-point spread. I know that Kansas State's going on the road, but it's Missouri.
Yeah.
Help me make sense of this number, man.
So you just mentioned it. It's because they're on the road. They would be like a 9.5-point favorite if they were home, would be my guess. I've watched many a Gamecock team go into Columbia, Missouri, and win. I don't see why Kansas State can't go in there and cover. It would shock me if they did not. That's another game I'll be betting for sure. Kansas State puts up points. They score a lot. Missouri, not as much. I bet against Kansas State last weekend at 15.5, and they covered that pretty handily. Seeing them go into Columbia, I don't expect it to be too much of a battle. Then again, I thought the same thing about
Utah and Texas
Utah and Baylor, as well as Oregon and Texas Tech, and both of those were sweats, and only one of them covered.
Yeah,
it's like, so obviously Vegas knows much better than I do, but my assumption is that this K-State team is probably going to go into Columbia and handle their business pretty handedly. The only explanation for the line is that it's on the road, in my opinion.
Yeah, like I look at this is a team that's played South Dakota and Middle Tennessee State.
Yeah,
and beat Middle Tennessee State 23-19.
Yeah,
I just don't see it. This is probably a trap line. There's always these every week. There's these numbers you look at and you say, what the hell does this even mean? And it's Vegas like trying to sucker you in and get you to bet. Maybe there's a fucking torrential downpour coming on Saturday to Columbia, Missouri. Something, I don't know, something along those lines that might shift this. But I'll be on this number as well. I'm gonna lay. I probably even on the road I would have laid at least a touchdown, maybe 8 or 9 points. I would have expected probably at home they'd be more of like a 2 touchdown favorite. 9.5 seems fair, right, compared to the 5.
Right.
But I wouldn't have expected it to only be 5 on the road. So I'm going to be in on this one. That's definitely going to be one on my ticket this weekend. Kansas State -5. It just feels like free money. But every time I say that, Vegas makes me fucking sweat all the way to the whistle. And as you said, right, we didn't even cover Utah against Baylor. So
nope.
And Oregon was one that really shouldn't have covered. We got kind of a crazy
pick 6, baby.
Yeah. So we were pretty fortunate on covering on that one.
Yep.
Another line that doesn't make a ton of sense to me is UNC Minnesota. And I know UNC struggled a bit last week against App State, but who doesn't struggle against App State? Like, can we finally just admit these big time schools play App State, and App State's going to take them to overtime no matter what? They might even knock them off. Ask number 5 Michigan from a fucking decade ago. And I know they've got two more ranked upsets in the last 10 years, but that was kind of the big one that put them on the map, right? This is a legitimate App State team, so for me, this number feels really weird because Minnesota's not good.
No,
this is a Minnesota team that is going to struggle to be bowl eligible this year, and UNC is a ranked team that I think deserves to be in the top 25. They're not one of the 10 best teams in the country, but I think they are a team that can threaten you like one of the best 25 teams in the country, especially with Drake May under center.
Mm-hmm.
Does this line make sense to you? Am I missing something here with this line at 7.5? It feels like this should be like a 2 touchdown game at home.
Yeah, it does feel that way. I think North Carolina covers here. That would be something that I would bet. North Carolina is a good team. They had the best win of the season, week 1, right? I mean, watching Drake May get back there and operate that offense.
Better than Texas and Tuscaloosa?
Of week one, all right? Of week one. They had the best win of week 1. Sorry.
Okay.
Maybe the whole year. Who knows?
Maybe the whole year, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Carolina could go undefeated the rest of the way, and the only loss comes to the UNC.
Yeah.
And Drake May. And if that's the case, then Drake May deserves to be the number 1 overall draft pick.
Right.
No, I'm with you. Like, Minnesota's not a very good team. They beat Nebraska by 3 in week 1, and then Eastern Michigan they beat 25-6. But like Eastern Michigan's bad,
Yeah.
North Carolina's not a bad team. Their defense has improved from last season. Their offense has taken a slight step back, but I think that's just because they lost some talent. I don't think they're okay. So that would mean that they're worse, right? But like Drake May is not any worse this year than he was last year. Mac Brown's still a good coach. I don't imagine that North Carolina struggles in this. The game probably is like a 14 to 17 point difference is my that's kind of how I'm envisioning that going. Now we might have weather. You never know, like North Carolina in the fall, in the early fall, you don't really know how the weather is going to act. But I would imagine that North Carolina comes out and handles their business pretty handedly.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think if this is less than 10, it'll be a surprise to me. I think we're looking at like a 38-24 type game. Their defense isn't great. I get that. And Minnesota's probably going to be able to run the ball a bit on them. But I don't see Minnesota slowing down that North Carolina offense. Too many weapons with Drake May at quarterback. I just think that's a game that North Carolina's got a chance to potentially wash them out by a couple of touchdowns.
Yeah.
All right. Any others on the slate that you want to talk about?
So I know we don't have a line for it, but you got Miami playing somebody who
Bethune-Cookman?
Yeah, Bethune-Cookman on Thursday. So I will be watching the Minnesota Eagles game, but I'll have my eye on probably on my second monitor watching Bethune-Cookman, who's a team that plays college football sometimes, apparently. Miami really handled their business against Texas A&M, who had a historic recruiting class 2 summers ago, and has lost some of that talent. Right, they transferred.
A pretty historic exodus last year.
Well, yeah, they still have like the number 1 and number 3 tight end. The number 1 tight end is injured with an ACL, but like regardless, there is talent in College Station, right? So to see Miami come out and play the way they did, Tyler Van Dyke make what he threw 5 touchdowns was last week, I believe. I mean, the guy's kind of living up to what we thought he was going to do last year. But Mario Cristobal's got those boys on a warpath down there in Miami, and I don't expect that to stop anytime soon. Again, I know we don't have a line for that, but can you talk to me about what you thought going into the week last week about Miami and Texas A&M, and then did your thoughts change at all after you came out of that game? And do you think that whatever it's probably going to be like 34.5, right? Is this a trap line? Playing on a short week at home they're not going to have any fans in that fucking stadium because they never do.
Yeah.
Like, what are your thoughts on Miami as currently constituted?
Yeah, Miami, I think they're another team we talked about with Texas, right? That I think there's a lot of people that are just kind of champing at the bit to say like, oh, man, the U is back. The U is back. Because it was so fun, right? During the 90s and then the 2000s when they were assembling fucking NFL teams down there in Coral Gables.
Yeah.
It's been a slog for them over the last, 15, 20 years because – they've not been able to replicate that, especially after they kind of got their dick slapped a little bit with some of the violations under Coker, I think it was, that got them kind of first hit with violations, and then there was some additional ones down the road with Uncle Joe or Uncle Jose or whatever his name was, kind of taking the kids out on the fucking money boat and yada yada. But I like this Miami team. I like Tyler Van Dyke. You're 100% right that I think this is a year later than we expected him to be a guy that could kind of get this offense over the hump. Mario Cristobal has always been a guy that's put some good, fast defenses on the field, and I think if they can score points, they're going to be able to compete. In the ACC that right now it feels like it's Florida State's conference to lose.
Yeah.
But don't sleep on Miami because, you asked me if last week changed my thoughts. I actually bet the money line last week on Miami against A&M because, one, I'm not a believer in A&M. I'm not a believer in Jimbo Fisher. He's been perpetually Mr. Letdown.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I do like what Miami's got going. So I'm behind, Miami in terms of thinking like they're close. Yeah, we'll touch base on Mel Tucker here in a moment. I mentioned it briefly, but certainly we'll talk about Mel Tucker because that's a really interesting situation, especially some of the news that broke last week kind of quietly snuck some harassment stuff in there. Yeah, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. I just want to finish the thought on Miami, though. They feel like a team that's going to finish probably second they're in the Coastal, I believe, in the ACC. So
They got rid of divisions this year.
oh,
No
that's right, they did.
divisions.
You're
Yep.
absolutely you're right. So maybe they're the third best, second best team in the ACC, depending on where kind of they stack up against UNC later this season. But I just I like what they're doing. I like the weapons they have on offense. They're finally able to score some points, and they faced a little adversity in the middle of that game last week where it looked like A&M had a chance to kind of get away from them, and they bared down and they took back control of that game. I was worried about my ticket for a moment about halfway through the second quarter there, and then Miami really turned it around and kind of disappeared on them late. But yeah, I like this Miami team. I think that they're going to compete in the ACC. I'm not picking them to win the ACC, but they are going to be second, third, maybe they might even be in the ACC title game. Who knows? So that's the ceiling I see for them. I don't necessarily see them winning the ACC, but I've got them right up there this year. What about you? How do you feel about Miami?
I love that their leading receiver's name is Xavier Restrepo.
Yeah,
That's just a sick name.
great name.
You have Tyler Van Dyke throwing to Xavier Restrepo. Like, who doesn't love that, right? No, I similar to the Texas theory of them being back, right? Because those are probably the two biggest colleges where people are like, oh, we're back.
Yeah. Yep.
Maybe Notre Dame, if you really want to like throw them in there, right? But nobody does it like Texas and Miami. I'm not ready to say that they're back. I would like to see Tyler Van Dyke stay healthy through a full season and be play at this level through a full season. I think that Cristobal is a coach that brings out the best in the quarterbacks that play under him. He's kind of done it everywhere he's been. And Tyler Van Dyke has as much talent as anybody playing college football, except probably like 3 or 4 guys, right? But he's like a top 10 quarterback in the country, right? Like he just is. Yeah. You mentioned it. It's kind of a year later than we expected this out of him. But I think that second year in a brand new system, you kind of see that leap from guys, unless they're just generational dudes who can pick stuff up instantly. Yeah. But I do really like this Miami team. I think that down the stretch, if Van Dyke is healthy, they could really separate themselves, right? So in the middle, well, I guess not down the stretch, but in the middle of their season, they play at North Carolina, and then they host Clemson back-to-back weeks, right? Those 2 games are going to kind of set the tone for however their season ends up. If they can get out of those games at 2-0 and be undefeated going into the Florida State game on November 11th, which is at Florida State, I really think that they have a shot to win the ACC because, like you said, it's Florida State's conference to lose. We all kind of assume, right? Miami doesn't play Duke this year, so that's one more ranked opponent that's not on their schedule. But they do play North Carolina, Clemson, and Florida State all this year. So they've already beaten one ranked opponent in A&M, and they have 2 more to go. Probably 3. Clemson will probably sneak back in. Yeah. But if they could win those 2 games at North Carolina and home against Clemson, I think they're in the driver's seat to knock off Florida State and win that conference because it's going to come down to that game between those 2 teams, in my opinion. I would probably take, like, just right now, all things considered, I would take Florida State. I think they're one of the best teams in the country. But again, given health and the way that Van Dyke is playing, it wouldn't really shock me if Miami is able to knock off Florida State and win this conference.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, let's pivot to Josh's question, Big Stove's question. He wants to talk about Mel Tucker. He also kind of speculates Jimbo Fisher and Mel Tucker being out in the same year. I still think we're kind of in a year that I don't think A&M can afford to fire Jimbo Fisher because we heard about it last year that the boosters were not willing to pay the bill to fire him. Maybe they'll 2 years in a row, maybe they will foot the bill, but that was kind of the speculation last year that Jimbo Fisher probably would have been fired last year, but the A&M boosters weren't willing to pay his buyout. It's big. He got a fucking enormous contract, all that money, just like Mel Tucker, right? And I think the most surprising bit about the Mel Tucker contract, though, to kind of circle back to somebody who was fired this week, Michigan State is not a team not a school that you think is going to pay 10, 12, 15 million a year for a coach. Even when D'Antonio was in his heyday, taking them to Big Ten championships, almost every year and winning 10 games a year playing in big bowls, he was still not one of the higher paid coaches in college football, right? Even in the Big Ten, he wasn't one of the higher paid coaches in the Big Ten. So it was surprising a couple years ago when they gave Mel Tucker the money. They had a good year. You can't dispute that. They had a really good year, but they've done nothing since.
Yeah,
sure. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this situation? I want to kind of include the piece that we got last week too, that they kind of floated out that there were some harassment claims in, around the team, around the program, around the school. Was that kind of them setting the stage for maybe a show cause?
Yeah.
To fire him? I don't know. I'm curious your thoughts on this whole situation though.
Yeah. Obviously it's a sticky situation, right? Like you never want to speculate on something as serious as sexual harassment allegations without having all of the facts laid out in front of you, right? So I'm just going to work off the assumption that what we're reading in these reports coming from the school itself is accurate, right? So all things considered, if the reports coming from the school are accurate that he was indeed sexually harassing this woman on phone calls, then that absolutely is a cause for firing, right? Like that's an unexcusable, immediately fireable offense, right? Like that's not okay at any level, no matter if afterward. Well, I guess if afterwards she comes out and says it was consensual, then maybe you revisit the conversation. But as currently constituted, that's not the case, right? Mel Tucker says one thing, she says another. For the sake of saving face for the university, you got to get rid of him.
Yep.
I do think that the timing of it, like you said, is a little fishy, right? He's been terrible since they signed him. He got that huge deal and has done absolutely nothing with it. He's not. Reports are that the NIL stuff for football at Michigan State is not great. It shows in the recruiting. It shows on the field. The team is not good, and they have not been since the first year, the year prior to him getting this contract, right? I agree that he probably should not be the coach there, just from a football standpoint. And then when you throw in all these allegations on top of it, they absolutely had cause to get him out of there. I hope for his sake that these things are not true, and whatever the truth is, it does come to light and justice is served, no matter which way that falls, right? But I also hope for the school and for their sake that they can recoup some of these funds and use it to hire a football coach who's not bad. Yeah. Just start with not bad.
Yeah, let's set the bar low for expectations because they've had a pretty bad go of it the last few years. Hey, don't sully the name of Gary, goddammit. It's Larry Nasser. But yeah, I mean, they gave an unproven coach 10 years, nearly $100 million. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And I think getting back to what we were talking about, my dad mentions that, yeah, I mean, there are conferences that just get favor, right? The Power Five, they're the ones that move the needle.
Yep.
It's hard for these smaller schools. We saw Cincinnati get into the playoff 2 years ago. That was a big deal. So I hope we can see some of these other schools rise up and make these runs, but it really is very difficult to break through kind of that glass ceiling, if you will, when it comes to the Power Five schools.
To Stove's point of Jimbo Fisher and Mel out in the same year.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go down A&M's schedule here for a minute, and you stop me. You stop me when you hear a win after Louisiana Monroe.
Yeah.
So after Louisiana Monroe, they're home Auburn, who looked really bad against Cal, so they'll probably win that one. Home Arkansas.
That's not a guarantee.
That's not a walkover.
Nope.
Home Alabama.
Nope.
At Tennessee.
Nope.
Home South Carolina.
Not if South Carolina's offense is still humming.
At Ole Miss.
Nope.
Home Mississippi State.
Nah,
maybe. Then
we'll see how Mississippi State looks against LSU this week. Then we'll pass judgment.
They lose it with Louisiana. Okay. Yeah. So that's what, 2, maybe 3 wins.
Louisiana Monroe knocks them off this week. Maybe Jimbo does get fucking fired.
That would be incredible. Then they're home Abilene Christian. That's a win. Then they're at LSU. That's probably a loss. So that puts them at 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll toss in one more. 5 wins for good measure, right? A 5-win season in College Station for one of the 5 highest paid coaches in the country.
Right.
Get
For a
the
$200
fuck out of
million
here.
coach. Yeah, no chance.
That oil money springs abound, and let me tell you what,
That might
those
be
12th men, not having
that
it.
might be the catalyst. That might be the catalyst.
I would not be
My
shocked if they
dad's
played the Bills.
my dad's a little bitter about the Bills last night.
That
So
might be another win for them if Josh Allen throws 3
I
more
know Josh
interceptions.
Allen throwing that many fucking picks. Holy
Yeah.
cow.
It would not shock me if
Holy
Jimbo
cow.
Fisher's out this year. I don't think money is the issue. I know he has a huge buyout clause, but there is money flowing out of the ear holes down there
Yeah.
in freaking College Station.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'll see, man. We'll see. If they go 5-7, then yeah, you're probably right that there's boosters are gonna come out in full force, and yeah, we'll foot the fucking what is $140 million buyout?
It's something crazy like that. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's pivot here to our final segment and let's
All
talk
right.
our tailgate totem. So we had a little shakeup this week. We talked about Texas knocking off Bama. You've been on the Texas train. I'm jumping on, baby. I'm jumping on. That was a big win. I liked what I saw from viewers, but I want to get your thoughts. Georgia still kind of head and shoulders for you?
Yeah, until next week.
Yeah.
Uh,
we get knocked off this weekend by the Gamecocks, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, I said it last week. I'll say it again. They've been there. They have the pedigree. They have the coaching staff. I hate their offensive coordinator, but that's fine. They're a very, 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 very good college team who is coached by a great coach. Until they lose, they're going to hold that top spot for me.
Yeah. I slide them up one. I had Bama at 1 last week. I thought that the size and the athleticism of Bama was what separated them from the rest of the country. But clearly Texas showed me that I was fucking dead wrong about that because they've got athletes everywhere and they kind of bullied Alabama, especially at some crucial times in that game. Yeah, you're goddamn right. Hook them.
These horns are wide, baby. Come on
Horns are live.
Come on up. Big old horns.
So you're keeping Michigan in the running. I've got Penn State in the running. I think, we talked about it last week, and I think it still holds true. This is literally just the difference between who you and I think is going to go undefeated in the Big Ten, right?
Yep.
One team from the Big Ten is probably going to get in, and I've got Penn State. I think with Aller and their ability at the quarterback position that they haven't had in the past, they look like the real deal. Michigan gets Jim Harbaugh back this week after a 2-game absence, and for me, and I'm gonna kind of ask to get your thoughts on it, but I think they looked a little flat without Harbaugh the first 2 weeks. Missed both spreads. They didn't cover in either game. Really didn't get the offense going. Do you think that Michigan maybe takes it up a notch this week with Jim Harbaugh coming back?
Yeah, I mean, playing without your head coach in college football is tough, right? He's a great coach. He's done it. He did it at Stanford. He did it in the NFL. He's doing it here at Michigan. He's building that program up, and to not have kind of the heart and soul of your team out there on the sidelines with you is difficult for any team, except maybe Liberty when Hugh Freeze was on his deathbed in the press box. But Liberty's a different beast.
Yeah.
No, I fully expect Michigan to come out and run the score up. I don't imagine Bowling Green's going to put up any real resistance. Just Michigan's a tough, hard-nosed football team. They can run the ball on anybody with Blake Corum and that big O-line. Having Jim Harbaugh back makes probably a world of difference, in my opinion. I don't foresee them losing another game this year. The Penn State game is going to be at Penn State. Luckily for Penn State, that's a noon game because they have a bad record recently in whiteout games at night in Happy Valley, which is weird.
Wild.
But that's a noon game. So I would imagine that game's probably a pick 'em going into it, given as long as both teams are undefeated up to that point. But yeah, like you said, our totem thing is probably just who we imagine is going to go undefeated down the stretch. And I'm picking Michigan. You're picking Penn State. But having Harbaugh back makes a large difference, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say one thing, too, that I think works in Michigan's favor as the season goes. I don't think Blake Corum's 100% right now. And I think as he gets farther into the season, he's going to be better and better and better. And I think that that's going to bode well for that offense and not well for opposing defenses. Because when he's right, that dude is fucking unbelievable.
Yeah, and he missed that TCU game last year with injury, didn't he?
Yep.
That was. I don't want to say it's a difference, but it didn't help them.
Right. You're right. You could easily say it at least made an impact for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so we're flip flopped at 3 and 4. I think right now this is kind of splitting hairs for me. I had Florida State in last week, and I pushed Texas in this week, so I kind of left Florida State above Texas right now. I certainly don't have a strong argument against why you have Texas at 3 and Florida State at 4. Florida State, to me right now, as I mentioned earlier, it looks like the ACC is theirs to lose. They look like they've rebuilt that program. Norvell's got them boys fucking flying all over the field on both sides of the ball. Speed, size, everywhere. Texas, we already talked about their knockoff of Alabama. They are big, they are strong, they are fast, and they've got playmakers on offense. As long as they can continue to get steady play from Quinn Ewers, I think that they are a playoff team. What are your thoughts here on 3 and 4 with Florida State in Texas?
Yeah, I just value the win in Tuscaloosa more than I do a win over LSU in a neutral site. The same caliber that A&M did.
I don't think so.
The Alabama team was much better than this Alabama team this year.
Especially they had quarterback.
Yeah, they had the Heisman winner playing quarterback and a first-round draft pick playing running back.
Yeah.
And a top 3 pick at defensive lineman, Will Anderson. Mm-hmm. Just to rattle off a few of the first-round draft picks from Alabama last year.
Yeah.
That's not to say that Alabama's not a good team. Like last week, we both had them in the top 4, right? I mean, but to your question, right, of UT and Florida State, like I said, I just value the Alabama win more than I do the LSU win. I think down the stretch of the season, that will probably play out in real time in my favor, with LSU maybe trending down in the SEC. Alabama maybe too, but I'm still high on Alabama. I still think they're a really good team, and they have the best coach in the country. But that's the reason that I honestly would put UT at number 1 if Georgia hadn't just won back-to-back titles and Michigan wasn't in the playoff the last 2 years, right? I can't bump Texas, who is perennially back every year, above those guys whenever they've been there and they've proven it with guys that were on that roster already,
Yeah, for sure. All right, to round out here, you've got Penn State and SC. We've talked about Penn State.
Yeah.
SC, there's no secrets there, right? It's Caleb Williams. It's all that fucking offense. They're scoring 104 points a game this season. They almost covered the over.
Yeah, by themselves
against Stanford last week in the first half. It was unbelievable what they did last week and what they've done so far this year. Caleb Williams, we talked about that dude is a fucking mutant.
Yeah, it's unfair. He should not be allowed to play against
rollout.
Where he zips from the sideline, zips it to the back of the end zone, about 27 yards, I think.
Yeah.
Just on a freaking rope. He should not be. He's the 15th best quarterback in the NFL right now, and he plays in Southern California. He should not be allowed to play the rest of it. Dude, go to freaking Arizona and just train for the draft. Actually, don't do that because I want to watch you play.
Yeah.
But that's what he should be doing.
Yeah, for sure.
You have a Heisman.
He's already off the board. It's just a matter of what team's taking him at number 1.
Yep. Yeah, 100%.
And then Notre Dame, I'm higher on Notre Dame than you. I look at it. I love what they've got going on at quarterback. Marcus Freeman doing a great job there. And obviously their defense is going to continue to be good because he was their defensive coordinator before taking over as head coach. But for me, what makes this a year that's different than we've seen from these Notre Dame teams that have been hyped and then they go to the playoff and get their fucking asses beat in, or they get their dicks beat in a New Year's Day bowl. I look at what Sam Hartman can do. He's battle tested. He's a veteran. He's savvy, and he can make fucking plays. My biggest concern is health with him. And by the way, ESPN, don't fucking ever make me throw up before a game showing that video where his mom made a necklace out of his rib. Come on.
Uh-huh.
Get out of here.
I agree.
But for me, that's the big thing with Notre Dame. They've got playmakers. They've continued to put talent on the offensive side of the ball, but they've got a quarterback this year. So I've got them on the outside looking in right now.
One more note on Southern California.
Yeah.
Their number one running back and leading rusher is a South Carolina transfer. So, whatever. Do with that information what you will. Shout out Marshawn Lloyd.
He left the real USC for the fake USC.
He did. He absolutely did. What a freaking bum.
All right, Bub. Well, that brings us to our conclusion here. I want to thank you. It's always good to talk shop with you.
Yep.
Look forward to next week. We don't have the kind of big clashes in the top 25 this week that we've had at least one or two to talk about the last couple of weeks, but still some good matchups on the slate. And, you and I were talking before the game that there's some unranked matchups that have some real intrigue. So we may have something surprise us and something we really got to talk about next week. But look forward to it, man. Appreciate you every week. Thanks for coming out. For Bentley, for the Backyard family, this has been another episode of Tailgate Trash Talk, brought to you by Backyard Sports. We are